Welcome back to the Brass Band Conference 2021. Today has been a day filled with conversations and collaborations and inspiration, and we hope that that is a conversation that will continue to happen after today. I'm delighted to be joined by some wonderful panellists for this next session, which is a discussion, not necessarily a debate, but an open discussion about the creative case for diversity, focusing on inclusivity and relevance and what that means for us as the brass band sector. Again, I hope this is a conversation that you will take from today and run with. It's a conversation that we'll continue to have as BBE staff and trustees to understand what that means for us and what that means for you. But this conversation also belongs in the band room and belongs for you to take hold of as well. As always, we want you to join in the conversation right now by posing your questions to the panel. And you can do that by leaving a comment on the YouTube stream that you're watching now or by tweeting us and using the hashtag BBConf. So let's introduce our panel. First of all, we've got Julie Hogarth, who is a BBE trustee. She heads up the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Working Group and is the creator and founder of many a community youth band. Next, we have Abid Hussain, who is Arts Council England's Director of Diversity. He's here to talk to us a little about what that means as the arts sector as a whole and how we as brass bands fit into that. Next up, we have John Ward, who, as of today, is BBE's Awards 2021 Innovation Award winner, so congratulations to that. He is the musical director of Fulham Band and has done lots of work over the last couple of years in introducing EDI into the heart of his band. And finally, we have Sean Chandler. He's a musician, teacher of the deaf and staffer with the National Youth Brass Band of Great Britain. We're really, really delighted to have this range of panellists here today who are here to represent the art sector, the brass band sector, individual bands and individuals as well. Abid, I think if we start with you, it would be great if you could just set out for those watching actually what the creative case for diversity is, what that means and why it's something that we need to understand and think about.
Yeah, no, happy to. And firstly, thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. And it feels great to be with people in real life. We launched the Creative Case for Diversity back in 2011, so it's the 10th year anniversary of the Creative Case. And I guess for me, at the heart of the Creative Case for Diversity is recognising and celebrating the talent and stories of people irrespective of their background. And a story that I often share is I always take my daughters to see the theatre. And my daughters' names are Mariam, Aisha and Anisa. And I want them to see themselves reflected on the stage in the stories that they're told. In 15, 16 years of theatre, I can't remember the last time there was a character on stage called Mariam, Aisha or Anisa. So how can I inspire my daughters to say, this is a sector that you can work in? Last year, we launched our new 10-year strategy, Let's Create, and we've started to transition from the Creative Case for Diversity into our new inclusivity and relevance framework. And that has three key principles. So we're retaining the Creative Case for Diversity. And for me, that's very much about the work and the programming. So what you see on stage or when you go into a gallery. Critically, I think what's really important about inclusivity and relevance is we're also now beginning to look at the workforce, the leadership and the governance, just to see how representative that is of the communities that we serve. And that's both from the perspective of protected characteristics, but also, really importantly, socioeconomic background. So we want people from all backgrounds to be involved. And I think something which will be really interesting for today's conversation is that focus on communities. So we want organisations to really reflect the communities that they serve, but we also want organisations to think about who they don't see in their audiences and what are we going to have to do to have those conversations with people that can often be at the margins. But we might need to leave our band rooms, our offices, to go and ask them why they're not engaging and how we can engage with them better.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hope that gives you a good overview of why we feel this conversation is important and why it's something that we want to champion. Brass Bands England has a challenge 2030, and that is by 2030 we want to see bands represent the communities that they serve. So it really fits in line with the Arts Council's vision, but also where the new inclusivity and relevance framework fits, because that is all about embedding communities and all about, you know, being there with the people who are there with you, creating art with them, but also welcoming them in to the art they're making as well. John, I'd be really interested to hear from you in terms of your band in Fulham, and how, because I know that's something that you've really tried to embed, is to try and represent in the band room. What does that journey look like for you?
Well, the important thing really that I should say is that the motion came from the players. It was I think it was June last year. I go hazy after all this time, but I think it was around June last time, after the George Floyd story had been developing, and there were lots of different reactions from different organisations, just in some way trying to express something of their support for equity and diversity. And we had a very challenging discussion about it to find out actually how we wanted to respond to this as a group. And we decided fairly quickly that it wasn't going to be a case of kind of just putting a statement out, because that's pretty easy to do a statement. Anybody can write a statement in a minute, probably just with, you know, a couple of paragraphs. But we actually wanted to just take it a bit further than that. So we put into place some aspirations in the background as to what we wanted to do when we employed guest conductors or when we employ guest soloists. The repertoire that I look at as a conductor when I'm thinking and planning repertoire, who has written that music and what is the origin of that music as well. And also thinking about who we play to as well. You know, I suppose in some ways we've got quite a nice, pleasant, cosy existence in a nice, leafy part of London, and we enjoy our self-promoted concerts. But why aren't we thinking about doing concerts elsewhere and in different communities and to different people?
Yeah.
So that's where we're very much at the starting of the journey with it. As I say, it really came from the players. They were really keen to try and respond to this in a very real way, as opposed to just kind of doing the 2021 social media statement. We actually wanted to do something about it that actually informed how we went forward from here.
Yeah, and I think from the conversations and the work that I've seen you've done with Fulham, it's come from a very intentional place. Definitely, you know, you really are looking at practical things that you can do to readdress balance. But I think a lot of the conversation that we hear on this topic is that we need to change, we need to adapt, and that can feel very, very scary. But, you know, has that been a limiting experience for you, would you say?
No, quite the opposite. And actually, I'm genuinely not being flippant about it. It's actually been quite a simple process.
Yeah.
It's actually quite easy to think about using different people's music. All you do is you're looking in a different place as to the established ways of finding music. When you're thinking about the music that you prepare or the people you invite, it's actually really straightforward. There's loads of people out there, incredibly talented people from all walks of life, from all different backgrounds, and it's not difficult. It's actually been really quite straightforward, and interesting, because you find yourself just discovering new things all the time. So yeah, it's been a really positive and, dare I say, quite a straightforward process, really.
Definitely, and I think it's I think people worry so much that there's so much to do that they end up doing nothing a lot of the time as well. And I think that can be quite a dangerous place to fall. Whereas actually, I think what you've done at Fulham is recognise that representation means the players, the audience, the music, and everything that you do. So actually just putting that framework on everything has probably been easier than trying to really, really analyse what that means for each little element.
Yeah, no single organisation or individual or group of people is going to solve anything overnight. But what you can do is just kind of set into place ways in which you can sort of change and adapt straight away. And no doubt we'll get things wrong. No doubt we won't achieve all the aspirations we want. But the idea is that the framework is there to build and just to have everybody of the same mindset to make sure that we're not just following the same path as the previous 30, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, amazing. Abid, as someone who isn't embedded in brass banding, should we say, what does that stir up with you? Does that feel what you would think of as a brass band work, or is how does that feel to you about the sector?
Yeah, I mean, as we developed the inclusivity and relevance framework, we wanted to learn from the creative case for diversity. And one of the things we are doing with inclusivity and relevance is recognising there can be a more nuanced approach. So when we talk about communities, it's going to look very different. So in Fulham, it will look very different to Barnsley.
Yeah.
And it's recognising that there's an opportunity for bands to really think about what that relevance means at that local level. And again, I think I was really struck by what John said in terms of just engaging in that conversation around celebrating the music that can come from different places. That's relatively easy to do. But I think my advice, and I guess my encouragement to the sector, would be start to think about what you could do on your doorstep. And again, just ahead of kind of coming onto this panel, it's been fascinating to kind of immerse myself in the world of brass bands, recognising some of the progress that's been made around gender equality. There's more work being done around access and inclusion. And certainly from my own personal experience, I guess my parents migrated to the UK from the subcontinent, and there's a unique kind of brass band culture over there. So it's just recognising that actually there's something here which is incredibly powerful, and the bands are custodians of giving people an opportunity to engage in art and culture. And I guess what's a real opportunity for all of us working collectively as funders, as bands, as Brass Bands England, is how do we work to support each other to make sure everybody that wants to have the opportunity to play an instrument can do that. And it's okay if they just want to do it socially and just for leisure. And if they want to pursue something where they've got a talent and passion for it, we need to kind of create that pathway. And I think that's what I was really struck by Challenge 2030. The journey isn't going to happen in a year. And too often I think we try and set ourselves targets to achieve in a very short space of time. We need to give ourselves the time, invest the resources, and really kind of follow that pathway through. So I think by 2030, it's going to be really interesting if we were reconvening this conversation to see how far we've come.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm sure that 2030 will be filled with these conversations as we look back at what we've done over that period of time. We analyse where we're at now, and we look at what the next challenge is, because it doesn't stop with Challenge 2030. It's just really a marker along the way, I think, from our point of view. Julie, as one of the BBE trustees and someone who I know is very, very passionate about this, what does Challenge 2030 mean to you?
It is a journey. It's a huge area, because if you look at inclusivity, you're looking at lots of protected characteristics, first of all, and each one of those has different requirements or different ways of looking at them. So we've got Sean working with us now on disability, which is really good, and representation is really important. So representation is good. We've got race. We've got gender, we've got many aspects. It's a huge area. So all the help that we can get, we will gladly accept. And so we've been looking at areas such as disability, such as women's role in bands. And the results are really interesting. They're really important, I think, to get a baseline look at what's going on now. We know there is some work to do. There is work to do, and there are a lot of people who want to be involved in that change from inside banding.
Yeah, definitely. And I think so much of the work we've been doing is talking to the current community, talking to them about their experience, and whether that be the Women in Banding survey or the roundtables discussions we've done about race, a lot of that focus has been internal at the moment, and that work definitely needs to be done. But we're getting to a point now where we're really starting to stretch out and go, well, actually, what about the people that aren't currently involved? Let's push out that little bit more and make sure that they are seen.
Yes. Well, I think that's where my individual work in bands comes in. And there are some very simple things that you can do, such as, for instance, there's a lot of talk about repertoire. what's appropriate, what isn't appropriate. And a lot of the time, it's just contextualising that repertoire, even very, very simple pieces, which I'm involved in, very young players, beginners. And the pieces are simple, but they're still called things like limbo dance.
Yeah.
So what is that? Well, I looked up the history, and it was really shocking.
Yeah.
And I can share that with the band, and so they were bringing in some history and some context there. And that's something that I could do very easily, and it didn't matter who I was working with. In Leicester, we started out by focusing on SEN because that was an issue in the schools. And so we had to get staff who could do that. So that was training and understanding the SEN of the children in our area. It was a lot of social and emotional difficulties. That takes a lot of understanding, which may feel a bit of a big job for people in voluntary work.
Yeah.
But being inclusive is quite an active thing. It's not just not being exclusive.
Yes.
So.
And I think that's a comment that we do hear relatively often, I would say, is that my band room is open for everyone. I'm not stopping anyone from coming.
Yeah.
And that is
yes.
that's an incredibly well-meaning comment,
Yeah.
I would say. And I think people very, very genuinely mean that.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that it is an accessible and inclusive environment. And I wonder if we could go to you, Sean, now, and to talk about your personal experience as being a deaf musician and what you need from a band room to make that an inclusive place.
Okay, so I started playing cornet when I was in year 4, so about 7 or 8 years old, and I remember sitting in class and just hearing these sounds coming from outside the classroom, and they were the sound of the trumpet lessons being held in the library. And the irony's not lost on me. I have trumpet lessons in a library. And I just stood up, went into this library, and I saw the trumpets on a chair, picked it up, and that was it. But what was really important in that particular experience was the teacher came over and helped me. And I've got a severe hearing loss, and my teacher, who just instinctively, it seemed, knew how to communicate with me, made sure that I was looking at him when he was speaking, made sure that the room was quiet, as libraries normally are. And that was just it. So all the way through school and all the way through my lessons, I had a wonderful teacher, Bob Dean, who used to play with Fodens and Carmel Laird, and he was always trying to find ways to help me hear what I was producing and to really kind of think critically about the sounds that I was making in practice and in concerts. And I think that the conversations that we've had this morning are so inspiring because I think there's a real... I wouldn't use the word challenge, I'd use the word kind of energy. I think it's been a long time coming. I'm not going to cry, I won't. But it has been a long time coming, and I'm really inspired, actually, listening to you guys talk this morning. I think it's really important that when we talk about people that are already in bands, kind of looking outwards rather than looking inwards, I think that's really important because someone said to me a while ago, at a workshop that I was doing with deaf children, introducing them to brass playing, there is someone out there who is just like you, who needs to meet you. And I think that's kind of the catalyst, really, to just start the conversations and get the energy moving and all of those kind of things. So, yeah, I've been really blessed to have been played in lots of different bands, met lots of different people, and sat next to some really kind, understanding people. And it is just about creating those spaces, really. In the deaf community, we talk about deaf spaces, which is where we have accessibility. Deaf people can feel really kind of comfortable and they know that their accessibility is being thought of and kind of looked after. I think the word community has a lot of different meanings, and you have deaf people all around the world. You know, they're not just all in one place. That'd be pretty epic if we were, but we're not. And so trying to kind of build the bridge with we call it the hearing world, had its challenges, but when it works, it's amazing. Yeah. And I think that we can really build on that and move forwards. So here's to 2030, absolutely.
And I think that's really interesting because I think that's totally right in that communities doesn't mean the one community, because that can be your band community, it can be your deaf community, it can be your family community, it can be anything. But people identify and want to be with people that they identify with. So it's really important that we look at ways that we make sure that young people can see themselves as included in there, so they feel that they are part of that community too, and we make active efforts to show them that is something that we can achieve. I think some of the projects that you've been looking at in terms of inspiring women, for example, and really showcasing that that's possible in a completely non-tokenistic way, because I think that's also a real danger point, that we can put people up, and that's great, and we should absolutely showcase people, but we also can very, very easily showcase people who are amazing at the sector in what they do. So I don't know if you want to expand a little bit more on that idea.
Well, to be honest, thinking about how we're trying to go about it as a group, actually one of the last things we want it to be is any hint of like a quota or a checklist or something like that. There is an element of that, because obviously you need to be able to think about, you know, the people that you want to be involved working with the group. But actually it's really simple things, and possibly things that wouldn't have happened had we not had the conversation last year. One example is on Friday, a little plug here, Friday the 1st of October at 1 p.m. at Regent Hall.
No shame.
Absolutely not. We've got a concert, a very sort of traditional band concert. It's on the eve of the National Brass Band Championships, and one of our horn players, Jenny, works in an incredibly diverse area in southeast London. So part of the idea of her being able to take the time off work to come and play in a lunchtime concert, she's bringing 30, 40 pupils with her. Yeah. And these are kids who probably are not going to get in front of a brass band. You know, I mean, not many kids do anyway in the whole context of the country, for example. But, you know, there's 30, 40 kids there who are going to hear a brass band probably for the first time. Yeah. So that's one thing. That's easy. That's really easy. But maybe we might not have thought about that last year. Yeah. Christmas concert, you know, we all do Christmas concerts. We all do perhaps play in the same venue. We're used to playing, you know, similar music and seeing the similar audience. But this year we've got a guest choir, and it's Inner Voices, which is a 30, 40 strong group of state school pupils from across London, representing all of London. So lots of different faces, lots of different boroughs, lots of different backgrounds. Again, that's really straightforward. That wasn't, you know, digging deep in the internet and trying to find somebody and desperately trying to tick that box. It was looking online, looking at making music partners and checking out some of the groups in our area. And I emailed the director, and within a couple of hours, emailed back saying, I'm so thrilled that you've asked us to do this. We've never actually had an invite to play with a brass band before, and that would be amazing. You know, where do we sign, basically? Yeah. So that's happening. You know, and with that choir will come parents and friends and family, hopefully as well. That's easy. Yeah. It really is easy. You know, it doesn't have to be a massive soul search. It's really straightforward things, steps that you can put into place immediately. Yeah. And you know, that perhaps we should have been thinking about anyway, but you just find yourself doing stuff that just comes easy and that you've done before. And actually, it's been pretty straightforward from that point of view. Yeah,
and I think that's, you know, and that's absolutely no shame as a voluntary organisation that you should take the easy route. And it's very, you know, when you've got concerts that you know work, that you know sell out, well, why would you change that? It's very easy not to. But actually, I do think collaboration is one of the easiest, most productive ways of reaching out that little bit further. And certainly in the previous session, we had a conversation with Liz Lane. That conversation with RSVP Bangor, for me, was so illuminating. Because they absolutely jumped at the opportunity to play with the brass band. They'd never experienced that before, and they thought it was so interesting. But they also recognised that sound world works so well together anyway. So there's so much creative interest that we can make by just stretching out that little bit further. And, you know, just because it's a Bangor group or any other kind of different musical genre, that doesn't mean that it's not going to work well and meld really, really beautifully to create something.
To that end, sorry. I think it's really great that we're thinking of like ways that we can reach out, but I also think as a deaf musician, we need to be kind of thinking, okay, there's opportunities, there are organisations out there. We as in my case, people with disabilities or additional needs, we need to be getting in touch with brass bands and kind of like finding ways that we can work together. So if there's any innovation, have like BSL kind of translation, there could be a visual aspect to it. And there's so many different ways in which the deaf community and the way that deaf people express themselves in sign language, and also in something called visual vernacular, which is basically storytelling in sign language. And then, you know, through that, we can encourage more deaf and hard of hearing and visually impaired people and all the rest of it to get involved with banding. But then again, it's about like creating the space that they can feel safe in, and finding ways to be the instigator and make sure that we're all moving in the same direction here. You know?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, you know, and picking up a deaf young boy and placing him in a band without any support is not inclusivity. And, you know, just making them part of the space without the necessary support around it.
100%.
But that doesn't, it's very, very possible.
Yeah. And also I think that anything that you would do, certainly with people with additional needs, anything that you would do or put in place to make sure that they have access is beneficial to everyone else in the environment. So certainly from a deaf musician perspective, having clear instructions, one sound at a time, making sure that the acoustics of the room are good, making sure that everyone knows the piece that we're playing. I've been on the wrong end of one of those before, you know, and all of those, just making sure that communication is clear and the conditions are right. Yeah, if you think of a flower that isn't growing so well, you don't look at the flower, you look at the environment around the flower, you look at the soil, the water, the sunlight, and all of those kind of things. And I think that's a nice picture to have.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Julie, I'd be really interested, kind of following on from that, some of the schools and the projects that you've worked in and how you've made inclusive spaces, because I would say that that's something that you have definitely done in the work that you've done.
I think that making safe spaces, inclusive spaces is really key. And I think collaboration is also been part of that. So building partnerships with schools, for instance, and building partnerships with communities is the whole that's the work. It's not the music.
Yeah.
It's creating the environment that the music can happen in. So we worked with a school in the council estate in Leicester, specifically to try to give the council estate, which had a really good reputation for knife crime, a new reputation for music. And over 5 years, it did work. It brought children to that band who'd never had music before in their lives, and families who'd not had music in their lives before. So, speaking to families and being interested in your community as well, knowing what's out there, playing in your community is something that bands do.
Yeah.
So we were lucky, really, because all of that diversity was there already. We just made a space in it for bands. It worked that way around. We didn't have to jump out or go out. I think the challenge those children faced and face now was where to go next as they develop and they become good players, and where will they go next? Because location is important. We know that it's much easier to go somewhere local to you than to travel. And if travelling's an issue anyway, because you don't have a car, then that's more of a problem. So I think the developing on is really, really important. Perhaps bringing those development places to the localities, to the cities.
Yeah.
Would be a great thing.
Yeah.
So, mobile bands.
The mobile touring bands.
Yes.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think we think about, you know, we do so much work with the young people that we work with, and we put so much of ourselves into it. And I think the idea of sending them off to somewhere that isn't as safe as the environment you have made for them can be a very, very difficult thing. But with also knowing that they musically, they need to progress, and you want them to do that.
Yeah.
But wanting to find somewhere that's appropriate for them to do that in a safe way.
Yeah.
And I think I think there's very different but equal challenges of inner city and rural working as well, because rural isolation can be a real issue as well, being not being able to access the arts. And actually that means that the small pocket that you have around you is your access. And that's it. And that can so often be your local band.
And that's where I am now as a contrast in a very small location. And that's kind of given completely different opportunities to bring the world into the classroom and talk about stories from elsewhere through the music. We did a thing with animals yesterday, and I said, local animals, sheep, cow and dog and cat, they're all like one-syllable words, so they're rubbish for rhythms. I said, we're going to have to go to Africa and get some crocodiles. And that was fun. That was a different way of being inclusive. And, of course, it's quite a white area, so the inclusion aspects are different. But there are definitely some children with extra needs who were responding really well because it was really fun, and so I'm really hopeful that we can still use that same sort of model of working with the community, being a school governor, delivering the local newspapers. Will still work.
Yeah, definitely, and I think that's a really important point you've raised there, actually, because the area you're working in right now is a very white area. So you've got to have an understanding of the reality of the community around you. There's no point trying to force a percentage that isn't there also. No. And that's not to say that we shouldn't be looking at active ways that we can increase the racial diversity of our participants and audiences. But I think the key is understanding actually what is there, but also that that's not the only aspect of diversity, that it's much, much broader than that and includes inclusion needs and includes women in banding and includes all of those elements as well.
I think that building capacity is really important. So like whenever we have the places that are in like rural spaces where they have a real desire to make it as accessible, diverse as it can be, then we kind of need to be open to sharing best practice, actually. And that's why Brass Bands England are being pretty heroic, I think, in pushing this, because I think that, especially online, because the things that we're going to share throughout the course of today and onwards is going to be so helpful in making sure that everyone knows what's out there and available to use in their own spaces.
Yeah, and I think that's a role that we, as a sector support, should take on and want to take on, that we are providing access for community bands to understand and to know where they need to develop. And for example, working with Sean on a consultancy process, he's going to have some time available for anyone who's working with deaf children to have some one-to-one time with Sean. That's something that we want to champion and want to work with. And this is one aspect of what that's going to look like. And I hope that's going to really, really branch out to include all aspects of diversity as we move closer and closer towards Challenge 2020. Because as you say, it's not one element, it's many, many elements. And the more that we can understand as many of those elements as possible, the better that we can serve our communities who all look very, very different.
And I'd say as well, if I could, that brass bands, the whole setup of us with our youth bands and our middle bands and senior bands and older members and all of the different kinds of music that we play and local presence all over the place, that sets us ahead of the game, really, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It doesn't happen in the other music genres. There are other music genres available, but brass bands have a lot of different things which are already in place.
Definitely. And Abid, would you say when it comes to looking at certainly the inclusivity and relevance and all of that, where Arts Council's focus is turning, where do you see the importance of brass bands in that?
So with the strategy, and we've just published our delivery plan, we've also kind of highlighted some of our priority places, for example. Yeah. So I think it's recognising that what we want to enable is making sure people can engage with arts and culture. Yeah. And that's both, I guess, from early years and children and young people. And I think the point you made, Julie, about older people as well. our job isn't to dictate to people what that arts or cultural offer should be. So I think for me, it's vitally important for the Arts Council to recognise the importance of the voluntary sector, the amateur sector. It's about just inspiring that connectivity and engagement. And for me, we don't know where that kind of magical experience is going to be. For somebody to have that first experience that really inspires them to say, we want to be a musician or a dancer. So I think from an Arts Council perspective, I think Let's Create allows us to have a more honest and open conversation around value of art and culture. And I think, certainly from my own experience and background, I kind of came into the Arts Council from a non-arts background, so I don't see this hierarchy.
Yeah.
And for me, it's just about kind of making sure we inspire people to have that opportunity. And I remember as a school governor, and you made me kind of think about the work that we did. In an inner city Birmingham school, we set up an orchestra for young people. And the majority of our students were from a Muslim background. And a number of the parents are from a very conservative Muslim background, where sometimes people would say, should music be encouraged or not? But when you bring a parent in to see their children perform, and the teacher says your child is gifted and talented, you saw those same parents with tears in their eyes. Because that's when you suddenly realise, actually, you need to nurture that talent.
Yeah.
And for me, I think the role of any organisation is to kind of take people on a journey. And sometimes the very people that you want to inspire might be facing some of those barriers that we're not aware of or not familiar with. And how do we build those relationships with parents, with carers, just to kind of make sure that opportunity is there. So I think the work that brass bands do is absolutely vital. And again, areas change. So for anyone who doesn't know Birmingham, we grew up in Sparkbrook, Small Heath. It's kind of Peaky Blinder kind of territory. And if you look at the area of Sparkbrook and Small Heath over the last 30 years, it's transformed. But the one thing that hasn't changed is the working class community. The demographics changed, where people come from changes. And I remember writing a blog for the Arts Council a couple of years ago. When I was growing up, I didn't have a concept of race. I didn't have a concept of difference on that. But everyone in our local area, we kind of shared the kind of community values. We were poor, but we were all poor. And I think it's recognising that race didn't divide us. Actually, we had a real community spirit, and that's where I think the work of the sector could be incredibly powerful. It's bringing people together.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's just a case of getting people through the door to make sure that they can experience that, to make sure that they can be part of that community, and we can show them that. Because I think sometimes that we take for granted that people actually know what a brass band is and does. Absolutely. And as someone who has only been involved in the brass band sector for maybe 3 years, I've learnt so much over that time. I didn't know what being in a brass band meant when I joined Brass Bands England, and I've been taken on a journey by all of the staff and trustees and all of the members that have been a part of that as well. I am an audience member that you didn't have before. The diversifying your audience comes in lots and lots of different ways. I am someone that, went to lots of arts and culture. I would never have thought to go to a brass band, but that's because I didn't really know what it was or what it meant. So I think shouting about that's really important too, and being really clear that actually it's embedded in community values, the work that you do, but also has real creative excellence. How do we get that message across, I guess? I don't know. We've got a couple of questions in that have come in, so I'm just going to have a look. So, are there any resources available to help bands assess their overall diversity? Now, Julie, I know that something that we have done as an organisation is look at the youth music toolkit, I think. Is that right? Yeah. So that's a toolkit that allows you to, work through a series of questions and challenge yourself and ask yourself questions about the people that are within your organisation and really think about what you could do to increase that. And that's very specific to youth music and working with young people. I don't know if there's anything else that you would recommend for bands.
Yeah, I mean, from an Arts Council perspective, we've published a number of resources on our website around inclusivity and relevance. So the inclusivity ones are very much focused on how you begin to change that culture, to think about workforce leadership. We worked with a lady called Nina Simon from the US who's developed these amazing resources about becoming more relevant. And it's just a series of kind of exercises or toolkits that any organisation can utilise. And it asks really simple questions around who do you engage with, who don't you engage with, what could be done to kind of build that up. And they're really practical resources that you could do and also involve your band members and community members. The other thing which I think might be really helpful is some of the work that the Jerwood Foundation have done. They've developed some excellent work around socioeconomic background. So if you're really interested in capturing that journey, they've got resources and toolkits that the sector can also utilise.
Amazing. And then another question, which I'm going to pose to Sean first, is are there new ways that we can ensure we reach new people from new backgrounds? So thinking from a disability perspective, how would you recommend that bands go about that?
I think that getting in touch with music hubs and seeing if we can engage and plan sessions which are targeted specifically for meeting the needs of those children and young people with additional needs. I think that it can be, social media is an extremely powerful tool, as we all know. I think that if we can get in touch with the schools, primary, secondary and nursery as well, they have a resource-based provision for deaf or visually impaired children and young people. I think it's really important that we get in touch with national youth organisations and we get in touch with the contacts that they have there, and also any material that we produce as Brass Band England is doing is make sure that that content that we put out there online is accessible. You know, captions, subtitles, even a BSL interpretation in some instances. And so, like I said before, as long as we're open and we're looking outwardly, I think we'll do it.
And I think that's a classic case there of brass bands might go out to a music hub and say, we'd love to provide something for you, we'd love to do a workshop for you and that kind of thing. And if you don't explicitly say, we are open and want young people with additional needs to be a part of that, you know, they might assume that they can't be. So sometimes being really, really clear about that, it might mean that you're breaking into a group of young people that you hadn't thought that you would be able to before. And Julie, same question for you from your perspective of working with bands. How do you think you can reach out to new people in the various different contexts that you've worked in?
I tend to use lots of social media in a very brazen fashion. Get involved in conversations like these. It's really important to meet people, find out what we're all doing, because everyone's doing different things that are really, really good, and we have to share that. I personally, I'm going to get embedded in the community. Yeah. Really just stick your nose into everybody's business.
Never, Julie.
But yes, I know. Kind of know what's going on and be interested in what's going on and like value all of those different things that are happening in your community. Communities are really interesting. You can tell that I'm lacking my own sense of community, and I'm looking for one. But actually, there are always interesting things going on in communities that you won't know until you talk to people, have the conversations in the band room, have those difficult conversations about race. That's a hard one, even, you know, about inclusion. About what, you know, how is it for you? How is it for you to do this? We have to be bolder, I think. Yeah,
and I think taking that step from opening ourselves up to it, to making active efforts into anti-racist work and that kind of thing is, you know, the next step that we can take to really, really make sure that that change does happen and that we can support people in that as well. and kind of along from that, when it comes to having challenging conversations, obviously so much of the work that that you've done came from the players. The push came from you. But were there any difficult conversations about that? Was that a challenging time?
I think there's a question mark of whether it would be seen. A few things. I'm just going to kind of throw a few things out there. Is there an element of tokenism? Is it a quota? Is it positive discrimination? Is it political? Is it virtue signalling? So all those really valid questions and really valid concerns we talked about. And actually, I think because I think the players who brought it forward and the way the dialogue happened meant that actually we were able to kind of address those concerns, you know, and it just helped kind of realign exactly how we were going to do it. So in the first instance, that actually kind of informed why we didn't do a social media post, because we didn't want it to be, even if we were absolutely certain that this wasn't virtue signaling, this wasn't kind of trying to look good or try to, you know, look very 21st century, even if, you know, even with the very best intentions, that could be misconstrued and taken the wrong way. So actually we thought, well, we're not going to do that. What we're going to do is we're going to start working fundamentally from what we do in every aspect. So, you know, like I said before, whose music we play, which groups we collaborate with, which people we book to work with the band, you know, where do we play, what music do we play, where does the music come from? And actually, like you're saying, you know, coming from the player's point of view, actually one of the great things has been actually people coming up to after rehearsal and saying, what about that piece by, say, Lucy Pankhurst, for example? Or I teach at a school with children from a particular background who've never heard a band before. Is there any way that we can get in front of these kids and play to them, or play for them? It might be someone who works in arts administration who has got contacts through there and says, well, you know, this is what the orchestra I work for is doing, so maybe we could look at doing something similar over here. You know, a good example now is, you know, I can talk to you about the idea of you know, schools and organisations that we can contact in London, and at least be put in the right direction where we can actually think about how we engage children and people who with additional needs. So, you know, all this stuff is right in front of us. It really is. It's all right there in front of us. I know the needs of, you know, from a sort of middle-class West London will be very different from, say, inner-city Leicester, or from, you know, inner-city Liverpool, or a village in Saddleworth or something like that. It's all different, but it's all there. You know, there's conversations that can be had immediately about it. So that's where I felt really encouraged that people were suggesting things, because for the first time, I think the intention had always been there, but I think suddenly the actual, well, this is actually what we want to do. So I'm going to talk about what we could do and how I could help with it. So I think put it in the hands of the players as well, put it in the hands of your members to think about what they can do, rather than it being a sort of top-down. Yeah,
and I think readdressing that balance can be really, really interesting, because we're often very stuck in the mindset that we have a conductor and they tell us what to do and they pick the music and they tell us how we should do it. And that's one way of doing it. But also opening it up a little bit more to have really a more collaborative approach in the band room means that actually those experiences, you know, they have ownership of those experiences. They can suggest those things, and that means that they automatically feel more included in the work that you're doing. And like you say, you're going to learn stuff as a conductor. You're going to learn stuff. You're going to hear from people that you wouldn't thought you had. And I think, as so much of the stuff that we've talked about today, particularly in the discussion element a little bit earlier on, broadening networks can only be a good thing. Opening ourselves up to have conversations with more people in the banding sector and outside of the banding sector and outside of the art sector even, is really, really valuable, because there's so much out there to learn and there's so much experience that we can pull from as well. And just on that, I've had another question in, which is there any particularly good practice or good examples from arts organisations that any of you are aware of who have been on a similar journey to us? Because we're relatively early on in our journey, I would say, and I think we have made big strides in that time, but we still got a long way to go. Abid, I don't know if there's anyone that you can think of.
I'm just thinking, there's a number of different initiatives. So, for example, there was something that I was involved with, which was the Changemakers programme at the Arts Council, and just the learning that came with working with James Rose, who worked at Bournemouth Symphony Orchestra, and the work that they've done, the work the Para Orchestra has started to do in terms of transforming some of that work around music within a disability context. Again, I think in music there's been a lot of strides more broadly around gender equality. The PRS Foundation's done some amazing stuff. And then UK Music, for example, have their 10-point diversity action plan. So I think it comes back to that point you were making about networks and learning from each other. But I think that has to be a two-way process, because I think my takeaway from this conversation will be, what can other parts of the music sector learn from the banding sector in terms of the work that you're doing around communities? How do you begin to remove barriers to engagement and participation, and actually being really embedded and enrooted in communities? And one of the challenges, I guess, in particularly urban centres is you can have the big infrastructure in the city centres. How do you get into the communities where people live, work and play? And that's where there's an opportunity. So I guess it's a challenge and a provocation. We can learn from other sectors, but equally people should be open-minded and kind of say, what can we learn from the experiences that you've shared today?
Yeah, absolutely. Are there any other organisations that any of you have been particularly inspired by in the work that you've done over the last few years?
So Drake Music.
Yes.
Just phenomenal. I think they look at the individual, they look at all of the factors surrounding the individual. I think they're just colossal organisation. Music and the Deaf have done amazing work, and I think Music and the Deaf are really kind of working with deaf musicians like myself, and so like getting the message out there that deaf can do it and stuff like that. It's really cool. And there's some other stuff that's kind of bubbling behind the scenes. I'm not sure if we're able to talk too openly about them, but I think organisations are realising the beauty of diversity and embracing it, and once they embrace it and kind of own it, the rewards are so beneficial for everyone. It's not just the select group that we may be targeting or not. The rewards are there for everyone.
Yeah. What about you?
I think EDIMS is a very powerful network with a lot of voices who are bringing some really interesting ideas, but also they're really good at sharing opportunities across different musical genres. That's one that I would recommend everyone joins. It's a mailing list, but it's great, great information.
Yeah. And John, anyone that you could think of?
I think a personal inspiration would be the Para Orchestra, and in particular my friend Clarence Adu, who's in the orchestra. Known him for many years, and a fantastic individual. And I think for most people, it was certainly the first time I'd seen the Para Orchestra was at the 2012 Olympics. I think was it the closing ceremony or the opening ceremony of the Paralympics. Very beautiful and very moving. So that's one organisation that has kind of really switched me on. Yeah.
And I think for me, an organisation who has featured many of these organisations of the work that they've done is Sound Connections, who, whenever I've experienced their events or training, I've come away buzzing with things in my head that I feel like I need to think about, which can be a challenging experience, but it's also a really, really amazing one, because for me, Challenge 2030, it's a long way away, or it's creeping up, and there's a lot to do, but there's also so much potential, and that's so exciting, and that's what I'm really, really looking forward to over the next few years, is to see how we push ourselves and how we delve into that potential and how we really embrace diversity to create new things and to see how we evolve over the next few years. It's just a really, really exciting prospect. Amazingly, we are coming thick and fast to the end of our time. We're not quite there yet, but if you have any questions for any of the panellists, this is your last time last chance to get them into the YouTube chat or onto our Twitter feed. So get those in now before we finish up. A few other final comments that we've had in are around whether we should change what we do. And that can be challenging, I think. But in a conversation that has been bubbling throughout all of today's events is whether we need to change in order to make that happen. And I wonder if I could just get a very quick comment from each of you on how you feel about that. Abid, I'll start with you.
I'd probably use the word evolve.
Yeah.
I think change can be kind of a little bit overbearing. I think it's more about evolving. And it's kind of just recognising that if things are beginning to change around you, how do you adapt to that? But I think at the heart of it, you can't take away what's at the core of what you do.
Yeah.
So I think it's kind of balancing the bit that's non-negotiable, the bits that are negotiable. And for me, it doesn't have to be something that's polar opposite. So you're not going to give up on brass.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you lose the essence of that. But I think it's about evolving to take people on a journey with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Julie?
Well, having tried many different formulae over the years, including what if we introduce new instruments, or what if we take away the repertoire and do experimental repertoire, I think I come back to there's a lot of elements in the brass band basic model that I like to hold on to.
Yeah.
The B flattiness is a big one. Orchestras, it's a nightmare for that kind of thing. That sort of thing where you can actually, those sort of key elements, but choose mindfully, if you like. Choose the bits that you want for the job you're doing, because band's doing different things. If you're going to be at the champion section, you've got to do certain things and choose certain elements. If you're going to be working like me at the grassroots level, you choose different bits. Choose the ones that you want and choose them intentionally. And what can go wrong, really?
Absolutely. Tom?
It's interesting you mentioned about negotiable and non-negotiable. Well, with the brass band, I think the non-negotiable thing is it's a brass band. You know, it's not going to be something else, but that's not to say that you can't do a lot with that brass band. So take, for example, a typical concert for a brass band, I guess, in the UK. Let's say it's a bandstand in the middle of July. In that hour and a half, there's a whole lot more that you can do with your programme than you did 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And this isn't necessarily changing formation. This is not dramatically changing the repertoire. This is just thinking a little bit differently. And like as I said, there's things people can do straight away. You know, we've tried to do that already. Still more work to do, but we've tried to diversify the repertoire. And just change up a little bit of what we do, but we're still a brass band. You know, we'll still wear a uniform of sorts. We'll still do the traditional thing. We'll still do the bandstand. We'll still do the contest. We'll still do the recording or anything else. But there's lots and lots of things that you can do with that model, and that's, I think, we're only at the very, very tiny start of it, really.
Yeah, definitely.
I'm going to come at it maybe from a different slant. As a deaf musician, every single rehearsal that I've gone to, whether it be with a brass band, wind band, or a big band, and every concert that I've performed in, I've faced a barrier of some sort, whether it's the in-jokes, whether it's the banter, whether it's the music, whether it's the intonation, whether it's the not hearing the conductor, whether it's not hearing the person sat next to me, whether not knowing how loud I am or quiet I am. I've faced a barrier at every single rehearsal. So I think if the banding community want me to carry on facing these barriers, you crack on as you are. We need to change. And actually, I think that we need to be very mindful of the barriers that people from different cultures face when they come into a brass band and the kind of deeply held beliefs that we have. But if the brass band world, if our movement wants to carry on excluding disabled performers or performers and players from different backgrounds, then yeah, you crack on. But you won't attract many people into your organisation who can give so much and enrich what you are doing. So that would be my answer. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. we're out of time, amazingly. And as I say, every time we have one of these panel discussions, I think we could have another hour on top, delving into all sorts of different things. This is a conversation that absolutely does not stop here. It's a conversation that Brass Bands England will continue to have, and it's a conversation that I hope that you in the band room will start to have too, because it starts with you on the ground doing that work. It's in your hands.